Good evening. I want to start with two things before we go any further. On Monday, Mary and Will and I went to Lexington. And one of the things we were looking for is pants for Will. Will's not real big into pants. He's more of a shorts kind of guy. Lucille has lost many hours of sleep fearing that he was cold, although he's typically sweating from sun up to sundown. But we went and got some khaki pants. Mary said, you need one pair of pants that you can look presentable in. And the length of those pants are the same length as my pants. And they didn't fit him. They were too short. He has now surpassed me in height. So I feel like he's going to be getting even more taller. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. Second of all, kind of sticking in the clothes thing. And we've made fun of Mom for, I don't know how, we're 42 years old. So for 42 years, I've made fun of Mom because Mom will buy shirts, put them in the closet. About 5 years later, she'll wear them for the first time. On that trip Monday, after looking for a long time, I bought a new Bible. I brought the same old one tonight. I'm not prepared to commit. I'm going to put the new one in about 5 years from now, I guess I'll break it out as well. So that was a couple of things from the trip to Lexington on Monday. I don't know that any of that matters, but nonetheless, if you're wondering why it's still sealed up, taped up, all that, it's still there. Tonight, we are continuing in our miracle lesson. After tonight, there's only 4 more left. We've worked our way through almost all of them. And tonight, we're going to be talking about the 10 lepers. You may remember, it's been a few weeks ago, but we did teach a lesson on leprosy. We talked a little bit about what leprosy was as a disease. Most people that had suffered from leprosy in the past, the Bible always makes mention that they weren't really supposed to be near other people. We talked about how that scientifically, the odds of you transmitting leprosy to somebody else are pretty slim. But the fact that it can lay dormant in you for a long time made people think that it was because I was next to this person. But the fact is, the person may have had it for a long time. They just didn't know it. And so we don't really fault them. Their conclusion was probably correct in the past, but maybe the method of actually finding that out wasn't quite there. But we do know a little bit about leprosy, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it here this evening, but I do want to address just a couple of things as a reminder. Perhaps you weren't here that night or you've not thought a lot about leprosy beyond that. But we talked about how the conditions were quite miserable for anyone who had leprosy. Not only was the disease itself horrible, it slowly destroyed body parts, but also afflicted the people. They were forced to live apart, to be away from everyone else. So leprosy was very much a physical, a health problem, but it was also a very much a social and emotional problem as well. Imagine being removed from everybody that you see every single day, and you're removed from them for their benefit because you could potentially transmit this disease to them. Well, I wouldn't want any of you to be shipped away from me. That would hurt me. But if I was the one who had the disease to be shipped away from you, that would hurt as well. So it was not like moving people to a leper colony or outside of the city gates. It really didn't make things better for anybody. And so you have this group that becomes outcast. I don't know that I would say pariahs, but there was very much a separation between the two sides. Lepers were not legally cleansed or free from their disease until the priest examined them and pronounced them healed. And you can read all about that. We did talk about that in the Old Testament, but there was some sort of step-by-step process that had to be, in many ways, a ceremonial healing of those who had leprosy. And the priest performed this ritual for one who was cured, and then that person would be allowed to return to society. And so we talked more about that the last time we talked about that, like I said, a few months ago. But I wanted to reiterate a few of the things about it. I wanted you to sort of get yourself into the mind of someone who would perhaps be suffering from leprosy, but also from someone who might know someone suffering from leprosy as well. Yes, ma'am. So it still exists. Typically, the poorer and the less healthcare access you have, the more likely it is. A lot of times, Africa and Asia, very rare. Europe and America. So odds of you knowing somebody to have it, almost non-existent. I think I told a number, but I can't remember what it was. But there's like 200 cases a year in the United States or something like that. So just just a statistically negligible number. And there's some kind of odds and ends ways that you can get it. Tonight we're going to be talking about not so much leprosy, but lepers, people that had it. And the lesson tonight is the 10 lepers, and we are going to be in Luke chapter 17. So I would encourage you to go ahead and turn to there. It's another one of those miracles that we only find in one spot. And this is Luke 17, and we're going to be looking at verses 11 through 19. Luke 17, 11 through 19. Where this takes place, if you'll look up here on the screen once you've found your way to Luke chapter 17, where this story will take place, it will be described as the road to Jerusalem, which is sort of vague. Exactly where, we don't really know, but Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and the Bible says that he enters into a certain village, but we don't know what it is, but it's along the borders of Samaria and Galilee. So if you come over here to the map, you can see this is Judea and the Dead Sea. If we go up, this is Samaria, and then this is Galilee, and this is like Lake Tiberias or Lake Galilee, depending on the language, the translation that you would, or Sea of Galilee, not Lake Galilee. But you would see that right here. But this area right here is the border. That didn't show up as well as I hope, that yellow box there. But you can see Cana, Nazareth, and Nain all within that box. The first miracle that Jesus performs is at the wedding where? At Cana. Okay. What did Jesus do in Nain? He healed the widow's son, raised the widow's son, exactly. Raised it. And then what's Nazareth to Jesus? That's his hometown. So this is an area where this takes place. It says it's on the border of Samaria and Galilee. So this is going to be an area that perhaps Jesus would have been most well known in. This would have been a place where Jesus would have been very prominent, most likely, in this area. We'll see that there were standing afar off 10 lepers who will cry to Jesus for mercy. But as we said, lepers were not allowed to be near people. This is an old road in Israel. This is the wall to, I don't think it's the city of Jerusalem, but I wasn't really clear of what it was, but I mostly want to look at the road. So I want you to think about, just for a second, that is the road. And that's not really a part of the lesson, but we will talk quite a bit in here about Jesus or other people walking from here to there. That's what they walked on. That's a common road. It's a path. It is. It's a path. It's wide enough for you to walk on. It's wide enough for animals to walk on, but not much more than that. It would have been really difficult to have took any kind of cart or hauled anything of significance. This is not the kind of road that most of us would like to walk on. Some of you may walk in your neighborhood, but that's a blacktop road, right? Or a sidewalk. You hear about people that walk in malls. The reason people walk in malls, it's flat and it's air conditioned and it's cool and clean and comfortable. That's none of that in this picture. And so what I wanted you to see was the next time me or somebody else is presenting something and they talk about these people walking, they talk about cleaning their feet, I want you to pull this image back up. Okay? How dirty would your feet be if you walked from the bottom of this picture to the top of this picture? Even if you was wearing regular tennis shoes or hiking boots or something today, you'd still be, and they were wearing what? They were wearing sandals, right? John the Baptist said that he wasn't fit to do what? To Jesus' sandals. The last one, but that was, they would have been pretty difficult. So I wanted you to see this picture to kind of get an image of what it would have looked like there in that time period. So, we couldn't wait for him to get a 4-lane road built. We've come a long way from where they were just a couple of thousand years ago. We have our picture here. I think, Maria, we talked about the Brooklyn Museum a couple of weeks ago. So I was just going to start taking maybe everything. Maybe the Brooklyn Museum just needs to bring a traveling exhibit to us. So maybe we can take a field trip. I don't know what it'll be. But tonight we're going to talk about these 10 lepers, and we'll get into it right about now. So this is Luke 17. Now let's look at verses 11 through 13 to start with. Linda Denham, you want to start for us there, 11 to 13? All right. Now, again, we read these quite often, and we could read the whole thing, but I want to break them down so we can look into it just a little bit. You'll notice there are no red words right here. Jesus will enter into the scene, but he's not present, or at least not speaking right here. So some simple questions to start with. How many lepers were there in this story? 10. All right. So we've got 10 lepers. That's a pretty big number. If you see 10 of anything, that's a fairly sizable number. You might see 10 cheerleaders or 10 football players or 10 coworkers. That's a big number. You would notice that group. Why might there be a large group of people with leprosy together? I think we've already talked about it, but go ahead. They kind of had to be together. Absolutely. So we talked, though, at the beginning about how if you were suffering from leprosy, you had to be removed from where? Your family, your home, your community. And so you're stripped of really everything. So why might there be 10 lepers together? There you go. So this lack of, like Lucille, you said, they didn't have nobody else around them. And so that sort of becomes the de facto family, the community. If I've got leprosy and you've got leprosy, it don't matter for us to be near each other. We're all going to have it, dude. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And so I think that we see this group of people together. They probably spent their whole lives, or at least their whole post getting leprosy lives together. Uh-huh. Absolutely. It's an opportunity for harassment, and for mistreatment. Now, as we've seen quite often with people who were suffering from illness or whatever it might be, in verse 13, what did those with leprosy request of Jesus? So they say, Lord, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. What does that mean? Okay, have pity on them, help them. Okay, they recognize him as the healer. I think we see that with the word master that's there. We sometimes see the word teacher or rabbi or whatever it might be. But they recognize that Jesus was capable of doing something. Now, not to be too semantical here, but what do they not ask? At least not in our language. They didn't ask to heal them, right? They said, have mercy on us. What might that mean? I think we've talked about this before, but compassion.
Well, I mean, anything he did for them probably would be better than what they've got. Whether it's food or or anything.
Right.
Would be better than the situation.
Absolutely. And so they're in this situation where, as Ben was saying there a few moments ago, probably not a lot of compassion, not a lot of mercy from other people toward them. They've not experienced this quite a bit. And so you're asking Jesus, have mercy on us. Whatever, you make the call, whatever it might would be. Kim? I don't know that we would take it that way. One of the things that they would sometimes do is approach people begging for alms or for food or something like that. I don't know, but we also mentioned that this takes place in an area that Jesus would have been familiar. So I don't know, if we, yes. I think this approaching people would be a common thing, but Jesus being from here might have been even more like, oh, that's Jesus. He's actually the guy that, because the word of Jesus has been spreading around even to the leper colony, right? That's probably happened there as well. Okay, other thoughts on that before we get into Jesus's response then? Okay, so they have approached Jesus and they say, have mercy on us. Lord, have mercy on us. So let's look at then verses 14 to 16, Lucille. Now, there's a lot to address here, and we'll address all of it here as we go. But we do see Jesus in this first verse here, verse 14. So whenever they said in verse 13, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Verse 14, when he saw them, he said, what? What does Jesus tell them to do? Go show yourself to the priest. Now, we've talked about Jesus's methods of healing so far. This is a unique one. Does Jesus touch them? Does Jesus necessarily heal them in a way that we've seen happen so far? In fact, Jesus says to do what? Does that sound familiar? No? Well, what did we talk about earlier? What was the process of cleansing leprosy? You had to be cleared by the priest. So Jesus here in this healing is following the Levitical law, right? He's following the old law in this approach of how they're going to heal it. No, that's true. That's true. And it says then at the end of verse 14, go show yourself to be to the priest. And it says, and so it was as they went, what happens? Okay. And so as they went, they were cleansed. Now, imagine yourself in this position. Suffering from leprosy. You've been ousted from the community. You clearly have a handful of people that you're spending a lot of time with, but these are probably not the people that you would like to spend the most time with. You'd rather be with your parents or your kids or your family or whomever it might would be. But what is your emotional state going to be once Jesus tells you to do this?
I can see them running.
Yeah.
I can see them running. And as they go,
right.
I'm getting better.
Tony? Absolutely would have been a level, because this is what you've, I don't want to put words into it, but I will just a little bit. This is what you've kind of been waiting for, right? And you probably know enough about this story of Jesus, like Kevin, you said a minute ago, that this is the guy, like, maybe something here will happen. Ben. Yeah. Right.
They weren't going to the priest because they had been healed.
Right.
They were just going to the priest because Jesus told them.
Right.
I don't think they knew what to expect. But then they noticed, hey, we're better.
Absolutely. So after this happens in verse 14, then let's look at verse 15. Of those healed, and we said how many were there healed? Of those healed, 10, only one leper does what in verse 15? So if we look at verse 15, it says, and one of them, so one of the 10, one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice does what? Glorified God. So he returns, and maybe how would we describe this today? What did he do? I think that's how we would. So he thanked him. Like he went and, I appreciate what you have done for me. He glorified. Only you could have done this. Whatever words you might want to say right there. But only one did. Now, well, I'm afraid I'm going to ask the question. We'll get to that in just a second. Why do you think 9 didn't?
Thankful to God and wanted to recognize, hey, I can get sick again anytime. This is a gift from God. I need to thank God.
Yeah.
Rather than just caught up in the moment.
Right. Others. It could have been. Could have been. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. Right. We've seen sentences similar to this, situations similar to this. There were times when Jesus healed people and he told them to not what? Don't go tell. There were times when he told them to what? To go tell, right? There were times when people thanked Jesus. There were times when people sort of went on their way. There was the man who'd been cleansed of, had the demon, right? And he was dying to go with Jesus. And Jesus said, no, you need to stay. You can probably tell more people. You'd be more successful telling your neighborhood about what happened. Well, what do you think these 10 lepers are going to go do whenever they can go back into the community? They're going to tell everybody who cleansed. So the word of Jesus is going to spread, right? But we don't see, they sort of, that becomes maybe the main thing. Now, Jesus uses one last thing here in verse 16. Mm-hmm.
Lifestyle after they're better, instead of that continual thanks, they return back. That's a different thing. But if people are prone to go right back to the whatever they were, And these people here, they're excited to get back home, see their wife and kids,
sure,
mom and dad, whoever the case might be. And it's easy to put God on the back burner when you really don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why church attendance is what it is. But when trouble comes, then God becomes parent.
Sure.
And these 9 here that went to show themselves to the priest. With the priests throwing anybody out of the church and talked about Jesus or recognized Jesus as God. We don't know what they ever did because like they're different.
Sure.
They might just kept to themselves.
Yeah.
Fear being thrown out. But this one, we know that.
Right.
Went to Jesus, proclaimed Jesus, thanked Jesus.
And then one thing too, what I think about is most people were never cured from leprosy. Okay, you got leprosy, the real deal. Leprosy, you're not going to get better. People had imperfections in their skin, white places, and stuff like that, and that could be leprosy. So they would segregate for a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then after a while, that turned out to be a pimple or something, something
right,
different, bull or something like that. And so I can imagine the priest thinking, "Wow, there's 10 people here.
Yeah.
Out there all there at the same time. They probably, I'm sure they were smashed.
Right.
Straight that. And how can 10 people be here? That has to be pretty phenomenal.
Right.
This don't ever happen.
So as Jesus then, as we see what heals, and we're not seeing Jesus talk yet. This is Luke's description in verses 15 and 16. But the man is referenced, I should say that Jesus will reference him a little later. In verse 16, this is not Jesus making the reference. It's sort of a dial back too. But he was referenced as what nationality? It says, the man fell at his feet, gave him thanks, and he was a Samaritan. Why might this be mentioned? Yep. And so he's a Samaritan leper, which probably puts you about the lowest level of rank for the Jewish world at the time that it could have been. But he mentions this. Think so? Think so. Why else? Yeah.
They didn't really understand what they were doing or understand God as much enlightened as us mighty holy Jews.
Right. Right. So I think, Ben, I like what you're saying right there, because we said at the beginning, Jesus healed them in a method that was very Jewish. And they went to be declared, they were following the law, right? They're following, we're supposed to do this. But this one says, I need to go back and thank Jesus for it. There's a little Old Testament, New Testament in this story right here, that we can follow the law. I can be baptized. I can be cleansed of my sin, but I should be thankful to who for what? For it. I should be thankful to, and I need to be thankful to Jesus for doing that for me. Not say, well, I was baptized. Well, that's really good, but that was only because Jesus came, lived, died for me, right? So I need to be thankful and grateful to that. And sometimes it was like, the Jesus story, that happened, but I was baptized, or I did this or that. We get kind of caught up in that law book, checkbook a little bit, right? I did this, and we sort of forget the love, the grace, the fact that really, if it hadn't been for Jesus, you're just getting a little wet, right? There was baptism in the Old Testament. Boom. Right. Yep. And yeah, so it quite often the Samaritans seem like they're the good ones, right? Yeah. We're in lesson 30 at least of these, and if you remember, those first 2 or 3 was almost strictly Jewish, right? And then it was sort of like, well, Gentile healing, but just because it's kind of the right thing. To now, it's like it didn't matter who this guy was. They're all lepers. Gentile, Jew, Samaritan, whatever, heal all of them. And so you're exactly right, Connor. We went from sort of a restricted sort of covenant to an open door for all who would be willing to hear and accept Jesus. Ben?
Jesus said in that scenario about the woman at the well, they said we got to worship here. We say we worship here. So what Jesus said? No, so all that God requires you to worship in spirit and truth. God is seeking those who worship Him, such to worship. God is seeking. God wants our worship. Mm-hmm. This one Samaritan gave God what he wanted. God wanted worship in return to be worshipped. God.
Absolutely. Let's go to the last 3 verses here. This is Luke 17, verses 17, 18, 19. Annette, do you care to read this one? I like that we'll sometimes see in the Bible the language that Jesus uses, quite often as a way to make you realize that you were kind of in the wrong. Jesus seems disappointed in the lepers who he had healed, and he asked, were not 10 cleansed? Where are the what? He says, where are the 9? Which is a valid question, right? 1 come back, but there were 10. Should have been 9 others as well. We've already addressed not what Jesus said because it was sort of referenced before Jesus taught, but he said, were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this what? Now, I like the use of the word foreigner right here. Because usually when we talk about someone who's foreign, they're not familiar with our customs. They're not familiar with what we sort of do. But Jesus said, this foreigner, the person that you probably would look down upon, came back and said, thank you. And you, well, the Jewish people who were there still around, because the 9 obviously were gone. But he said, and you probably would have talked bad about this person. You might have thought ill of him. I don't know. I love the use of the word foreigner right there because I think it's a spin straight into the people like, you all would talk bad about this person, and perhaps you shouldn't be. What did Jesus tell the grateful leper? Arise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. And he did what Jesus had asked of him, but he also did a little bit more, right? He was supposed to go to be clean to the priest. He did that. But he even comes back and does a little bit more as well. Questions? I like this story, and I was glad that for us to be able to study it here this evening. I want us to look at. Yes. Ben is so good at taking these. I think Ben and I are just going to tag team. I'm just going to teach it, and Ben, tell them what they need to take home with you, and then we'll go from there. Number 1, you won't always be thanked, right? We won't always be thanked. Only 1 of the 10 returned and thanked Jesus, okay? And we won't always be thanked for everything that we do. How many of you have done things and not been told thank you? Well, Jesus told the disciples in John 15 and verse 20, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you as well. So you can't, they didn't thank Jesus. So if Jesus didn't get thanked, should I expect a thanks? Probably not right there. And Jesus wasn't showing that gratitude for what he did. And I'm never going to heal 10 people of leprosy. That'll never happen. And so that's probably way greater than anything I could do. But they didn't thank Jesus, so probably won't thank me. But that's okay, because expecting gratitude can make us bitter. Sometimes we can become bitter because we weren't thanked. There are times, I'm 42 years old now, but there are times that I think about things when I was younger, and I regret not thanking mom and dad for certain things. And I know that mom and dad knew that I appreciated them, and I know that but it wouldn't have took a whole lot to have said, thank you. I regret that. And I try to be better about it now, but I think that that's part of growing up, right? I'm sure you all have the same thoughts toward your parents for things that they did, and your parents maybe have been gone. But our neighbors and our coworkers or whatever, but recognizing that we won't always be thanked keeps us from getting angry about it. Because I did something for you, Tom, and you ain't never said thank you. What's that going to make me think about Tom if I'm not careful? I think less of him. Next time Tom needs something, y'all can help him. I'm not. He did. Do you know people that get to that point? Well, we can, right? Well, what if Jesus had shut it down after people didn't thank him? This would be a pretty sorry series of lessons. We'd have got to about 4, and that'd been about it, right? But we've come along because Jesus didn't do that. Jesus continued to heal people, even though it sometimes seems they weren't appreciative. And in some cases, they almost turned around and got Jesus in trouble for doing it. But expecting gratitude can make us bitter. But we want to thank others when they help you. And that should be our thing. I can't help that you didn't thank me. But my task, my business should always be to thank you. You know, if a person holds the door for you, thank you. All right? If two people hold the door, thank you. You ever been in one of those situations where you hold the door for somebody and they say thank you, and then they open the second one and you're like, well, thank you. Everybody kind of laughs. But, you know, it's kind of an awkward situation. You don't really, you've already said thank you. So sometimes my students, they'll sneeze and I'll say, bless you, or something like that. And then they'll sneeze again. I'm like, I'm not telling you twice. You know, it's kind of a little joke right there. But how many times should we forgive, the Bible said? Was it 70 times 7? Was that what they said? How many times should we thank? Same kind of thing right there, right? If your neighbor helps you fix something, thank you. A couple years ago, the little girl that lives next door, she's married now, but she was in school, and we were on vacation, and she came and brought our trash can back off from the road. Well, she didn't have to do that. I didn't even ask her to do it, but she knew we was gone, and she went and did it. And I thanked her, for it. I mean, that's a kind gesture on her part. But we need to follow the example of the one leper who came back and healed. Because even if nobody else in this room, even if nobody else in your life is thankful and expresses that thanks, that shouldn't stop you from doing it. And our goal should always to not be what other people do, but what Jesus would want from us. That should be our striving and our goal for it. Questions before we close up shop?
I think if we understood the verse, thanks be to God, give us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ, it would put everything in its proper place if we understood. This world is going to give you tribulation. Jesus said, be of good cheer, overcome it. But if we would say to ourselves every day, thanks be to God, which gives me the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ, that's all we need to do. That puts everything else in perspective. The world mistreats you, says ugly things, or don't appreciate you. That's okay.
And it's a comfort.
It is everything. That's one reason I gotta say this. I've written those stories that I've written. Scotty Stanford last night told me 50 times they appreciate those stories because 8 or 10 of them about him. And I pointed out the ones that were about him, they had read them. They said, we have so much enjoyment out of it. Scotty will live on, okay? Because with the little kids, it's too little to remember their grandpa. They'll read about him on these days in those books. And they'll know, Daddy, Grandpa was a good guy. He was a good friend that people loved him. And that's one of the main reasons I tried to keep these memories alive with people that have meant so much to me. And I am thanking them for what they've done, grandparents or mom and dad. Or
Right.
We need to be able to continue to say the things I think God would have more of.
People often